Once again, we're honored to have Victoria Reynolds. She's the author of Transcending Fear, and she is going to take one segment of her book, which is being self-centered. Victoria, define what being self-centered is.
Well, the first thing I want to touch on is the misperception that self-centered is the same as selfishness. Selfishness is thinking only of ourselves at the expense of everyone else. It's something that a lot of people do naturally, not even understanding that that's what they're doing. And self-centeredness is actually being centered within yourself. Two very, very different things.
Yes, they are. Being centered within yourself is a complete concept and understanding of different thinking. Would you define how a person becomes centered within themselves?
Well, it really stems first with understanding, as we've laid out in the previous segments, that being centered within yourself comes first with making the conscious choice to become that. And ultimately creating this life that we love and falling in love with life, which is ultimately the premise behind transcending fear. So it's rising above fear and falling in love with life, is making the conscious choices to get us to that point where we're falling in love with life. And in order to really come to that center, when you really understand what being self-centered is, it's living your life by your own truth.
By your own truth. In other words, you don't live your life to please someone else or to impress someone else. You actually listen to the dictates of your own conscience.
Correct. So as I've mentioned in the past, a lot of us are going through life based on fear-based beliefs, living our life unconsciously by fear-based beliefs. Then we get to the point where we choose to consciously live our lives based in love. Fear is false and love is truth. So once we make the choice to start living our life based in love, it's living our lives from that truth that's in our center, literally that core guidance system that every one of us ultimately has, and living from the inside out rather than from the outside in.
Give a breakdown of what a fear-based life is. I think a lot of people don't understand what fear versus love really is.
Okay, well, fear doesn't always look like fear. And it took me a while to understand this because somebody was saying, well, I had some fear in my life. And I'm like, oh, I'm not afraid of anything. Like, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm successful, I'm not afraid of anything. Not understanding that fear doesn't always look like fear. It presents itself as what I call other sneaky little buggers. It shows up in the form of guilt. It shows up in the form of shame. It shows up in the form of blame and resentment and feelings of worthlessness. Any emotion or feeling that is dark or heavy or oppressive or limiting is fear-based. And any emotion that is light and uplifting and supportive and expansive is love-based. And most of us go through life unconsciously living our lives by fear because fear is very controlling. And we base our lives on other people's expectations and all of this judgment outside of ourselves. And when we choose to consciously let go of all those fear-based beliefs and this outside perspective, then we choose to live our lives based in love, which is an inner perspective. And that truth that's inside of you will always love and support you and lift you up and expand you.
So actually, we are love-based, and the fear has been superimposed somewhere along the way in our childhood, our upbringing, someplace.
Right. So for me, my understanding is that when we are born, literally, you look at a newborn baby and they're just a little ball of love. Like that's all they know. And you see them, they're 3 weeks old and they're beaming whenever that first smile shows up, when they finally figure out what smiling is, beaming, just radiating love. That is all they know. And they learn fear. If babies aren't born in fear, babies are born in love. Fear is what they learn. So it literally becomes, like you said, superimposed upon us. And at some point, as adults, we get to consciously choose whether we continue to live our life based in fear or continue to live our life based in love. It becomes a conscious choice. It's not an easy one, I can guarantee you that. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And It's a continual, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because it's of a fear that's causing me, or why am I not doing that? What is the barrier that's here? Am I causing this limitation inside myself? Is it the voice in my head that's telling me I can't do it, or why shouldn't I do it, or what will other people think? Or what is the thought process behind the choice that I'm making?
If we have enough self-respect, we don't let other people disrespect us. You have that respect for oneself and for others. But in most of the world, most people are more afraid of what other people think than what we personally think. We sacrifice who we are for their acceptance. And that starts back in our childhood, somewhere along the way when you were usually little kids, and we know that if we make mommy and daddy unhappy, they're not going to love us. They're going to get in trouble.
Right.
And you get in big bad trouble sometimes, physical violence trouble. And that starts the fear base, correct?
Yeah, it starts very young, and it is at first because our parents are the only people we know. At first, it does start with wanting mommy and daddy to love and accept us, and then it becomes about our peers. It becomes the other kids in the preschool. It becomes about wanting the teacher's approval. It becomes about thinking our happiness comes from someplace else. So we go through life in the fear of how we will be perceived by everyone else and start to lose who we really are. Really small children know who they really are. And they stop living by who they really are at the expectations and judgments and perceptions of everyone else. And in forgetting who they are to appease everyone else, they start to lose that happiness that little teeny tiny children have. I mean, you see a little, like 8-month-old baby, and they have what I call happy legs. Those little legs are just going. They're just so happy to be alive. And then at some point, they realize they have the misperception that they have to earn love, that they have to earn acceptance, and they forget to be who they really are. And as adults, we then get to choose how we want to go through life, to remember who we really are, or to go through life based on the perceptions and judgments of other people. And you can never be happy trying to live from the outside in. You'll always feel empty.
Seems like there's a basic problem with most of us on raising children. We don't know how to discipline our children without inducing fear.
Well, because it's how we were raised. We're just regurgitating what we've been taught, and not even intentionally. Consciously raising children has to be a conscious choice. You have to be able to sit back and accept full responsibility for raising conscious children. And that's just something that people have never been taught. It's like everything else. It's evolution of belief and evolution of how we do everything. Up until a few years ago, children didn't have any rights at all. There are some perceptions that children need to have the hell beat out of them because they're born evil.
So we really get caught up not knowing proper parenting. We think that discipline and abuse are the same thing.
Yeah, not understanding there's a vast difference between discipline and punishment. They're complete opposites.
Define them.
Well, punishment is fear-based, and discipline is love-based. Discipline simply means to teach. And with punishment, it's reactionary. So a child does something the parent perceives as wrong, and they react out of fear without even thinking. Discipline requires a conscious choice of how you're going to handle a particular situation. So in that process, the parent also disciplines himself or herself.
Discipline also refers to learning, to have a discipline in something. So if the child were to learn consequences, cause and effect, responsibility, that child would get stronger and stronger and be able to cope with life. If they're just punished, how are they going to learn that?
Right, and so how many of us, I remember as a child being hit by my dad, and I had no clue why I was being spanked. I just knew I was bad. And I had no concept of actions and consequences. The first time I heard the word consequences, I think I had my own kids. So I had no concept.
In the concept of fear, it's been a tradition throughout generations after generations that if parents didn't control their children, they were really, really bad parents. And control meant discipline.
Right.
Discipline is learning, and the children didn't learn. Instead, they were terrorized, and it became fear-based. And so they didn't feel loved, they didn't feel respected, and they didn't necessarily feel safe. So we have a lot of teaching to do to get people to understand, to get parents to understand that discipline is learning. To discipline the child means to teach them cause and effect and get them to understand cause and effect. Because if they don't learn that, how are they going to cope in the big bad world when they grow up?
They won't. I mean, you know, for me, and you probably for you too, knowing your childhood was similar, I had no concept of cause and effect. The first time I had actually heard that my choices affect my life, I was 21 years old. I had never heard of the concept of cause and effect.
We were never allowed choices, so how could we know what choices affected our life? Blind obedience was the rule.
Right.
Obedience, period, without question, was the rule. Would you question your parents? Honor your father and mother. What does that mean?
But we had the misperception that it meant obey. And
Right.
that's not what honor means at all.
Define it.
Well, honor for me is comes from a space of love. Obedience comes from a space of fear. So honoring your parents comes from the space of being the best person you can be. I mean, ultimately, that's what every parent wants for their children.
Of course, that's what they want.
That's what it really means to honor your parents.
Right.
Is to grow up and be an honorable person.
Yeah, because that was their investment over the years of loving you, that would happen. So those that were afraid it wouldn't happen grabbed a willow.
Well, because what they want, what most people want for their children is to grow up and be happy. In our particular case, what our parents wanted was for their children to grow up and be a part of the religion. Happiness was inconsequential.
That's very true.
So in that particular circumstance, what they wanted to honor as an honor to them would be to grow up and be like them. And we couldn't. If I honored that, I wouldn't be honoring myself. And I need to come first. Not out of selfishness, understanding that my universe is an extension of my relationship with myself. For I must come first.
And if you don't respect yourself, how in the world can you respect anyone else?
You can't. It's impossible.
And if you're not honest with yourself, how can you be honest with someone else?
You can't. If you can't develop that loving relationship with yourself first, then your relationship is out there with everyone else is fear-based. So you don't really respect someone else. You're afraid of what that person will think. That's a misperception of what respect is. The word respect actually simply means to look again. It's a complete misinterpretation of what it means. It simply means, yes, to have another look at that thing within yourself or that person outside of yourself.
When one thinks about centering themselves, break that down about how that applies, not just with our parents and the fear, but how that really applies to be able to feel accepted and loved and cared about despite how anybody else feels.
Well, when you start breaking down all of those fear-based beliefs that I've talked about, you start breaking them down and looking at them and analyzing and seeing where they came from and what they really are, and understanding that I no longer need to believe those beliefs. And as you start to own what your truth is, you start to disbelieve.
That's right.
And unbelieving is a process, and disbelieving is a process. As you let those false beliefs go, you start to find more and more and more of your own truth. And the truth is that everything you need is already inside of you. All of the wisdom, all of the love, all of the compassion, all of the honor, everything you need is already a part of you. And as we shed those layers of false beliefs, we come more and more into the truth of who we are. And when you live your life based on the truth of who you are, and you genuinely love all that is you, and you're really centered in that space of self-love, You no longer need the acceptance of other people. You just don't. It's nice, it's lovely, it's icing on the cake. But if you don't like me, that's not my problem, because I'm good with who I am.
And the wonderful thing about that is that you can see the person that was fear-based and had to whip you into submission as having a serious problem of insecurity and fear.
Correct.
Which they projected onto you.
Right. So when you have a genuinely loving relationship with yourself, you learn how to have compassion for yourself. And when you have compassion for yourself, you learn how to have compassion for them as well. Because everything outside of ourselves is an extension of how we feel about ourselves. When we are in suffering, we project that suffering onto other people. When we have judgments about ourselves, we project those judgments onto other people. We assume that other people feel the way we do. And when we have that loving relationship with ourselves, we no longer feel the need to judge anyone else because we don't have those judgments against ourselves.
When we were children, where we grew up, judgment and blame were great tools for manipulation and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And they were really, really used a lot. And yet, growing up, we never realized for a minute that those were setups for control and manipulation.
Yeah.
We really thought we were bad and couldn't figure out what we did.
Well, that's why I say that fear is a sneaky little bugger. Because it really is. It just weasels its way into everything. And you really are completely unconscious of the role that it's playing.
Right.
Because it's so pervasive in our belief systems and in our cultures and in all of our systems.
Well, the manipulation of blame and complaining basically tells a child, you're not okay. You're not acceptable. Even though the child may not know what they're getting blamed for, they're being blamed for not being good enough. What's that? How does that apply? Why am I never good enough? My mom used to tell me that you are loved according to how much you love the gospel. Whoa.
Well, and what's really sad about that is that as a child, you have no concept of what love is anyway.
No, because we were never told we were loved.
So then one of the misperceptions is that worship is the same as love.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's not it at all.
But you're only allowed to worship the prophet.
Well, and his version of God.
And his version of God.
Yeah.
But our worship of God was fear-based.
Right.
Our faith was fear-based.
Right. So then it's not really faith.
So that's scary.
Because faith is love-based.
Right. So our whole system was held together by threats of fear, damnation, destruction.
Mm-hmm.
That's scary.
Yeah, and as a result of that, you have a whole bunch of people who have no sense of self-worth. And self-worth is an inside job. It's really taking ownership of who you are as a radiant being. You know, every one of us is invaluable. Every one of us was created in love and perfection. Every one of us is of equal value, and yet we have these belief systems that tell us we're not.
How does a person dig out all the old weeds of their life that are still crippling them to get them to understand that they really were born perfect, and all of this garbage, literally, that was heaped on them in the name of discipline and control and honor was so devaluing? How do they get rid of that?
Well, you know, it's funny that you ask that because I'm seeing plucking the weeds one at a time out of your garden. Oh, well, that one isn't any good. Toss it in the compost bin. Well, and then the other picture I was seeing was getting out the weed whacker and just cutting them all down. It depends on how fast and how insistent you are on going through the process. Unbelieving is a process. Disbelieving is a process. And what happens is that over the years, well, I believe every one of us was born with a light inside of us. That every one of us is the light. And that as children, we radiate this. We radiate love. We radiate light. That's why when a child walks into a room, everyone lights up. When a child laughs, everyone lights up. That inner light is so powerful and so vibrant and so radiant in children. And then what happens is we start to hide it underneath layers and layers and layers and layers of guilt and shame and blame and resentment and fear, all those fear-based beliefs, until that light becomes almost indetectable. And some people are in so much suffering that light is barely there. They're barely living. And so as we start to peel down all of those layers of fear-based beliefs, that light starts to radiate again. And if we can get to the point where we move through life as radiant beings we were born to be. That's the truth that's inside of us. That's literally the essence that we're made of. We are love. Like, we are love in physical form. And when we get that the love is inside of us, it's not something we have to get from someone else, we get to radiate that. It's palpable. It's how you get to move through life when you really get it.
The hard thing for a lot of folks is that they can't see how to forgive themselves for what they didn't know. They internalize all of this negativity, and then they don't realize that they, like the people that hurt them, are projecting it out, and you can't do that without hurting other people.
Right. So, that's part of what my role is here, is to educate people. People need to be educated. We can't keep believing the same thing over and over and over and over again and expect different results. That's the definition of an insanity, right?
Correct.
And yet we've been doing that, believing the same thing for thousands of years and expecting different results. It doesn't work that way.
But wittingly or unwittingly, what we do or don't do has an effect. So to not do anything has an effect, and to do something has an effect.
Yes.
So it's a choice, but not necessarily a conscious choice. It's a choice. Mm-hmm. So if we thought about what we do and think about the effect, is it love-based or is it fear-based?
Oh, it depends.
That's what I'm saying. You need to look into yourself and say, is my thought that I'm entertaining now love-based or fear-based?
Right, and ultimately, you can tell by, if you take a look at the choice that you're making. If it is love-based, it's based in the highest and greatest good of all concerned. Because ultimately, every choice, even every thought you have, ultimately affects everyone on the entire planet. And I know that's kind of a hard concept for people to get, but I'll give you a little example. You invited me to come up here. That was your choice.
Yes.
It was a very long drive. And I'm very glad that I'm here and that I got to be in your presence for the last few days. That was a choice that you made.
Yes.
I made the choice to agree to drive up here.
Yes.
In that choice, I put my kids in a summer camp.
Right.
My husband had made the choice to rearrange his schedule.
Right.
You rearranged your schedule.
Right.
Your daughter rearranged her schedule.
Right.
That was based off that one little choice that you made.
Right.
And as a result of putting my kids in that summer school, they had to bring on more employees to take care of the extra kids.
So it affected a lot
It
of
affected a lot of people. And then the bottom line of the summer camp, then paying more employees. And then think about where those employees spend their paycheck. It affects other people. Maybe they go out to dinner and the waitress or waiter makes money and then they get to go do something with it. Every decision we make ultimately impacts everyone else. And every one of us is a ripple in the pond.
And that's the beauty of it, because I made the choice knowing that when people heard you speak, it was going to make their lives better and bring them more peace and understanding, which would affect the next generation, because when they realize what they're doing, they will realize the cause and effect of what they're doing.
Right.
So that's why I made the choice, because I know you and your speaking are going to affect a lot of people.
Thank you. And I'm so glad that I jumped on it, because I see the opportunity. And this isn't about me. As you know, every time I sit in front of the camera, I have my little mantra that I do. That what comes through me, what comes out my mouth, is in the highest and greatest good of those who are here to learn from me. This isn't about me. I'm just the messenger. And I want what comes through me as the messenger to be what is best for the people who are watching. Ultimately, my light is here to help the world.
And every one of us are the same. So we should be realizing that everything we say and everything we do is important, because it affects the people around us. Mm-hmm. We can't spew out love or hate without having an effect. It's impossible.
So that's when if we bring that back to this idea of being self-centered, everything that's inside of us radiates out around us. That's why it's so important to really get in tune with who we really are on the inside and learn to have a loving relationship with ourselves, because that relationship with ourselves is ultimately what we project outward. It just is. So this whole idea of being self-centered is understanding that what we project outward is how we feel about ourselves. It's based on this relationship with ourselves and learning how to have love for ourselves. And it's really important to understand that self-love is radically different than arrogance. I mean, so many people have this misperception that arrogance and being prideful is the same thing as loving oneself. They're two very, very different things. Arrogance is fear-based. Self-love, of course, obviously, is love-based.
Right.
Arrogance is I'm better than everyone else. And that is a projection that's outward because of the fear of how you're going to be judged by everyone else. Therefore, I have to make myself bigger and better than you. When you genuinely love yourself, it doesn't matter. There is no above or below. There is no bigger or smaller. There is no worth more or worth less. There's just love. And in self-love, there are components of self-love like self-compassion, self-forgiveness, self-acceptance, honor, self-respect. It's all about the self. Really understanding that only through myself can I get to that place of peace.
If one doesn't respect themselves, they allow other people to disrespect them because they devalue themselves, so they accept it. It's not arrogant. Refuse to accept devaluation. Nor is it ego, as they say, oh, it's just you're arrogant, you're self-centered. Self-centered means to be centered within one's self. It has nothing to do with arrogance.
At all.
At all.
Yeah. Complete, absolute opposite. That's the way what you're talking about is arrogance and selfishness. Self-centered is completely the opposite.
That's interesting because when you look back at the cult in which we were raised, we were told that if we even took care of ourselves and looked good and were proud of our appearance, that we were vain and evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we weren't allowed to have any self-compassion or self-love or self-like or self-awareness even.
And we were told that if we wanted to achieve anything, we were evil, that our job was only to be a mother and to be obedient to our husband.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept of being self-centered was never even heard of in our lives.
No concept whatsoever. That's why I feel so compelled to teach it. Because I think a lot of people have never understood this concept of self. And I think a lot of people go through life based on this concept of how they will be judged. And it's very demeaning to the spirit. It's very demeaning to the soul. It's very demeaning to the heart and to that center of who we are. And make yourself the priority and understand that once you learn how to love yourself, your life becomes radically different.